Right.
That's a reconciliation.
Given the new set of circumstances with forgiveness, you can relate to that person in a way consistent with our faith. But if we've remarried, or if they've remarried, or what have you, there's not going to be a restoration of that relationship as it was. But can there be grace in that situation? Absolutely, by all means. Let's go on to number 4. Forgiveness lets people off the hook. Anyone say yes? Anyone used to think that forgiveness lets somebody off the hook? I see a couple of shaking heads. Yeah, that article I read back in 1996, and those comments afterwards, that was perhaps the primary objection that people expressed to the idea of forgiveness. Because we're letting people get away with murder. That's not fair, And so, I'm not going to consider forgiveness because forgiveness isn't fair. It's not justice. So what is the relationship then between forgiveness and justice? What's the forgiveness, the relationship between forgiveness and justice?
I would say that, for example, and 2 ladies I know, beautiful Catholic, devout, prayerful women, they and their kids had to participate in criminal prosecution against the ex-husbands, both of whom wound up in prison for molesting children. And in both of their cases, they were able to testify to the facts without being caught up in the process or overwhelmed with wanting to be vindicated, or they were able to pray through it while still doing their civic duty to protect the public from these criminal men that they unfortunately married.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a forgiveness element, but there was still submitting to right authorities to see that the proper procedures were followed. And there was no effort to shield these predators from prosecution.
There is, to be a Catholic means that we, embrace the concept of justice, but do we embrace a strict concept of justice? An eye for an eye? Or is our understanding of justice one that is tempered with mercy? I like to give the example, Pope John Paul II, now Saint John Paul II. We all know that there was an assassination attempt on his life back in 1981, I guess. And his attempted assassin was, of course, incarcerated. But then in a very public gesture, the Pope went to his cell and forgave him. But that did not release him from prison, okay? Because at the same time, justice is not negated by mercy, justice is tempered by mercy. And so just because we forgive someone does not necessarily mean that they are off the hook, with the consequences of what they have done.
Forgiveness and truth have to be the same, and it's true, the evil that someone has done and the evil that you've done, that's true. And then forgiveness is, they walk together. They don't clash. They can't clash. Or one wouldn't be they can't.
Right. Well, take about the situation of a broken relationship where maybe there has been, abuse or just a repeated, pattern of just behavior not indicative of a person who is able to engage in a sacramental marriage. You know, don't you forgive me? You know, yes, but part of the consequence is that I need to draw this boundary, you know, and I think that's an important point. One of the little nuggets I gleaned from a previous talk was, oh, I don't have it here. Do you know that phrase? Justice is getting what you deserve. Mercy is getting what you don't deserve. And grace is, oh, do you know what I'm talking about? How does it go? Yeah,
And
justice is,
grace is what receiving something you don't deserve. You're receiving.
yeah, there's something pithy about it. Yeah, no, but clever. Yeah, thank you. And it's, you know, so I was, years ago, a gentleman shared a story with me, and he grew up Jewish. He later became Catholic, but he was watching a movie on television with his dad, who was Jewish, who had grown up in Europe during the Second World War. And it's a movie called The Scarlet and the Black. Is anyone familiar? Some people are familiar with this. And it's about an individual who's a priest at the Vatican, roamed during the Second World War, and the city was occupied, you know, by the Nazis, and the local Gestapo chief was always trying to bump off this priest who was trying to secretly funnel Jews out of the city to safety. And the Gestapo chief was never successful, and then, you know, the Allies came in and they liberated the city, and the Gestapo chief was incarcerated, and this priest went to go visit him in jail. And he made sure that his wife and his family were treated with dignity and respect. And, you know, ultimately, this Gestapo chief converted to Catholicism. You know, this priest's ministry and witness just had a profound impact on his life, and it turned it around. And I've not, you know, full disclosure, I've not actually seen the movie myself, but apparently, as my acquaintance told it, at the end on the screen, there's an appeal for forgiveness. And my friend's father saw that, and he went through the roof. And he said, there's no way I would ever forgive those Nazis for what they've done, because it wouldn't be fair. And he's absolutely right, because to forgive Nazis for atrocities and crimes against humanity is not fair, but it is an act of mercy and love. So Catholicism does not negate justice, but Jesus doesn't call us to strict human justice, does he? Sermon on the Mount, you know, do not take an eye for an eye. Because as we all know, if we all took an eye for an eye, we'd all wind up blind, you know. So, and again, it's an important point, because I think that misunderstanding can inhibit people from considering forgiveness.
I wonder, that is such an ingrained thought. Do you have any opinion about the origin of that?
Of the desire?
Norm, yeah. I mean, it is so ingrained. It's like.
Yeah, it's almost, I'm not a child psychologist, but you know, you read stories, and there's almost a sense, kids get an early sense of what is fair and not fair. There was a Charlie Brown cartoon once, and he says, you know, gee, now that I'm old enough to defend myself, they teach me about sharing. You know, I mean, yeah, and
Yeah, it must be the difference of concrete thinking. That's a good point. You know, so maybe it's a developmental process, and most all of us get stuck in some place. I'll have to think about that, because it is interesting. About
right.
Why we think it's right.
I was just reading something the other day, and it was psychological studies with young people, and they have looking at 2-year-olds, and they have a real sense of, you know, this is fair, this is not fair, and then as one's thinking, you know, matures, Yes, so, right, but that's something, if we have been hurt, you know, I think, again, John Paul II once said in one of his World Day of Peace messages, you know, it is natural for us when hurt to want to retaliate, you know, in a sense, we need to engage with something supernatural, you know, with the grace of God, to keep us from acting on that instinct. So, yeah, hurt hurts. But, you know, so let's move on then. Number 5, forgiving someone repeatedly makes me a punching bag. Yes, please.
Makes you codependent.
That's not on here. No. Yes, it does. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, if you keep going back for it, because that's exactly what you are doing, you're not consciously doing that, but that's a part of what's it's almost like it's a part of your life now that you can't change until you recognize what it is. And, you know, I think in some instances, in divorce, we're a lot of times codependent, you know, with the person who is abusing us. But until we realize that, we can't really do anything about it because we keep going backward. That's what codependence is.
But
So,
marriage is for life. We made a promise at the altar to be married for better, for worse, sicker and poor, you know, sickness and richer and poor, better for, I mean, you know, so don't we need to keep forgiving someone if they keep hurting us and abusing us?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
We can forgive them, but that line, I love that line you used earlier. We can forgive people from a distance who need to be kept at a distance.
Yeah.
So, an informed, appropriate understanding of that marriage vow does not mean that it's a license to be a punching bag. So for better or worse, assumes a floor of respect and dignity and love, so.
It assumes that the other party is also equally able to
Right.
enter into that promise.
Right.
And repeated abuse is evidence that they are not.
Yes.
I think that is important because lots of good people will get in a very painful relationship. And, well, didn't Jesus teach us to forgive 70 times, 7 times? You know, this person says they're sorry, or even if they aren't, I need to forgive them. Because if I don't, I'm somehow not being faithful to my vows I made before God at the altar.
On the other hand, Jesus slipped away from the cliff and didn't let them stone him. So,
Oh, that, yes, right. No, I have to say, and thank you, Sharon, for jumping in, because the first time I ever gave a forgiveness talk, and it was late 90s, and it was a Lenten talk, and I was talking about Jesus' teaching that we need to forgive 70 times, 7 times, and there was a woman in the back, and she'd been very quiet because it was a several-week Lenten series, and when I had finished giving my little spiel, she kind of timidly raised her hand, and she said, if we follow that teaching of Jesus, doesn't that invite someone to hurt us over and over again? And I got the sense, just the way she looked, that there had been abuse and trauma in her life. And a lot of times, victims of domestic violence will think this, forgiving the other person is the Christian thing, to do. And didn't Jesus say that we need to carry a cross in imitation of him? And so maybe my being in this hurtful, abusive situation is the cross that Jesus wants me to carry. And if I try to extract myself from this, I'm not being faithful to Jesus.
But when we keep ourselves in those situations, then we cannot utilize the spiritual gifts God has given us, because we submit to an abuse that God does not want for us. He wants us to come and be alive and offer ourselves in service to Him. And if we are abused and we are held down, we have no self-respect, then we cannot do that properly. And God doesn't want us to be in a relationship where we are constantly abused. He wants us to be alive. He wants us to utilize our spiritual gifts in our marriage, in our single life, in every aspect of our life. To be abused and to allow abuse is not His will. Not for anybody, not for male or female. And so the sad part is that, yes, I mean, even I was brought up to believe that I had to remain faithful in my marriage, and I could, there was no way out of it until I finally realized that it was killing me. That I couldn't be who I was.
But you had been taught,
Yes.
or thought you had been taught,
Uh-huh.
that to remain in that situation was your Christian duty.
Yes, absolutely.
That's right.
And that is and I was taught properly to be who I should be to my spouse. But my spouse had an obligation to be who he should have been to me.
Correct.
And he should have helped me build, he should have been respectful to me and help me build my life as God would have me be. And I to him.
But that's not a message that's been communicated
No.
to the entire church
No, it has not.
community.
No.
And that is part of, please Sharon, I teed it up for you.
Yeah, you
No,
did.
okay, sorry.
I appreciate
Yeah.
this. So it's crystal clear. If people Google Canon 1153, you'll be very pleased with what it says.
Canon
Canon 1153. But I love what a priest who speaks on this issue makes a point that the cross that we might need to carry in imitation of Christ is what Elizabeth was saying, that we indeed accept God's grace to separate and divorce if that's what's necessary, and that's the cross. The cross is in our Catholic community to be a separated or divorced person. In terms of acknowledging the self-respect and the protection of our children. I mean, the protection of the children is a big issue here. So, yeah, so the cross, yeah, we can carry our cross, but the cross might be being a separated and divorced person.
Yes. And I'd like to make a helpful distinction, because, and I'm gleaning, this is not original with me, I need to give credit where it's due. My thinking on this topic comes from the Bishops' Conference's very, very fine document on domestic abuse. Is it when I cry for help or when I call for help? When I call for help. It's available for free online. And they address this situation. And they make it clear, no one is expected to stay in an abusive, hurtful relationship, full stop. But Jesus calls us to suffer. Aren't I supposed to suffer myself for this other person? Aren't I supposed to carry my cross? But as Sharon said, hey, people are trying to throw Jesus off a cliff, and he protected himself. So I think a distinction can be made between what we call necessary suffering and unnecessary suffering. Necessary suffering springs from our loving choices to help others or ourselves become the people God created us to be. In a loving relationship, a healthy relationship, do we sacrifice for the other to help them grow in holiness? Do we do that for kids?
No.
Yes. Is there suffering involved in that? Is it dying to self, as you
Yes, it
said?
is.
Yes. Okay. Unnecessary suffering simply makes us a victim of another person's illness or sin. Okay? Is it, and there are times, is it hard to distinguish between the two?
Yes.
Sometimes? Absolutely. You know, gosh, somebody, we might have a spouse who's extremely hurtful to us, very abusive to us, but we know that they're an addict, they're sick. You know, is it my Christian duty to try to journey with this person, drawing boundaries, but at the same time hoping for their healing and trying to do what I can from a safety? It can get a little messy. You wanted to say something.
I think with that example, you can forgive somebody, you can support them, you know, speaking to the addiction example here, but you don't have to live with them.
Correct.
You know, you can
Right,
provide other things, you can co-parent as best you can, but
right,
you don't have to
right,
live with them.
right. There'll be some suffering in that, but you're removing yourself from some unnecessary suffering, you know, being in that abusive situation.
Forgiving is not enabling.
Yes,
It's, you become for the other person, that catchphrase, a near occasion of sin. You're allowing them to continue to sin against you. And that's not what Jesus came down from the cross, he didn't get back up on it.
yeah, forgiveness, what would you say, is not enabling?
Is that enabling?
Yes, you're absolutely right, and the person in the back who talked about, yeah, we're not, to do that puts us in a codependent relationship, which is by nature an enabling situation, and you've also given that person an inordinate amount of power over you, you know, yes.
You know, at one point, in my healing, this came to me, is that Jesus said we have to love our fellow man. He never said anything about liking.
Yeah.
So I tell my children that I will always love you, Father, because you are the product of that love, and my 4 grandchildren are the product of that love. But I don't think I ever liked you.
Love is a choice at the end of the day. Like is a feeling.
Right.
Some people aren't likable. But they do things that.
So effective.
Yes, exactly, you know. So, you know, but, you know, didn't Jesus say we need to turn the other cheek? And what about that? You know, somebody slaps you on the cheek, turn the other one. Jesus is there talking about retaliation. He's using a Jewish rhetorical device to drive home his point, which is, as followers of Jesus, we are not to, because yeah, somebody strikes us on the cheek, you're going to strike them back, you know, and no one in an abusive situation should be encouraged to do it. We can defend ourselves. We can draw those boundaries, we can extricate us and maybe children if they are involved from the situation. But again, I would say that the absolute baseline of forgiveness, that first step, is making the choice not to retaliate. You know, a couple of years ago, maybe this last year, we marked the 10th anniversary of that terrible situation with the Amish community. You know, where the individual, the gunman, you know, shot all these young kids, and then the Amish community said, we forgive this person, and they were reaching out and providing practical help to the shooters' families. And then we had the Charleston church shooting in church, you know, and Bible study, and several of the individuals you know, who were involved said, you know, we forgive this person. And sometimes I admire that to no end, and sometimes I'm a little cautious about it as well, because I think it gives some people the impression that, oh, these people aren't hurting, you know, these people don't have anger, sadness, grief, all of this. They're in like some, oh, I forgive you, you know, because that's the takeaway for some people. I think when people who have been just immediately faced with that trauma, when they say, I forgive you, what they're saying is, I'm not gonna retaliate, and I'm gonna cling on to my Lord to get me through whatever it is I need to go through. Because subsequent to that, you know, the Amish people, you know, we hear, you know, they're experiencing great grief and great sadness and anger, which is okay
Yeah, it's normal.
and understandable, you know. So,
So
you know,
Scott, I just wanna say, I assumed they had taken your course before.
oh, no, yeah. So, but I mean, it's a great witness, but I think I don't want people then to take away, I think the part,
That there's no backup process.
there's no, and so people say that, see this, and they think, oh, that is so heroic, that is so saintly, that is magnificent. No way I can do it. That's beyond me, and that's not the reality. Those individuals, as good and wonderful and faithful as they might be, they are wrestling with all the same emotions that any human person with a beating heart is going to experience, you know, as a result. But they've made that choice. I'm not gonna retaliate, because two wrongs don't make them, there's enough evil in this world, and if I can't cling on to my Lord throughout this, then God help me. That's how I'm putting words in their mouth, but that's how I understand that. Let's move on to question 6. People should apologize before they're forgiven.
That's not gonna happen.
That rarely happens.
Well, what you say,
Maybe they
Sometimes.
should.
it rarely
Rarely
happens.
Well, or the words may be said, but the act is really not genuine.
Okay, so there's fake forgiveness?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, I thought you meant fake apology.
That-
Well, excuse me, yes, fake apology.
Yeah, he's,
It puts it on a timeline, that's why I said I disagree, because if it's on a timeline, then it's there's what did you say before, there's I forgot the word, there's some requirement, and there's no requirement.
Right,
You forgive, whether they've apologized, whether you apologize, yeah. there's-
right.
There's
If
nothing-
forgiveness is truly a free gift,
Yeah.
then we can't attach any